Welcome to my channel. The Peak of Ottoman Power, 1481 to 1566 domination of southeastern Europe and the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire reached its height of wealth and power in the century that followed Mehmed II's rule. The previous Islamic Caliphate's territory was further expanded by new conquests into Central Europe and throughout the Arab region, and a new brew of political, religious, social, and economic systems and traditions was formalized and evolved into a functional totality. Bayezid II, the majority of Bayezid-I's rule, 1481 to 1512, who succeeded Mehmed II immediately, was spent in repose. Consolidation of earlier conquests and the resolution of numerous political, economic, and social issues brought on by Mehmed's internal policies laid a solid foundation for the conquests of the sultans of the 16th century. The Devshirme party and the Turkish aristocracy engaged in a virtual civil war in Istanbul during the last year of Mehmed II's rule as a result of the economic restrictions placed on the country to pay for his military adventures. Due to the Janissaries' military control over the city, Bayezid was given the crown, while Sem, the more aggressive brother, fled to Anatolia and oversaw a revolt that was at first supported by the Turkish nobility. In the summer of 1481, Sem then fled into exile in Mamluk Syria. The Mamluks and the previous Karaman-based Turkmen king helped him return the next year, but his attempt to win over the Turkmen nomads was unsuccessful due to their attraction to Bayezid's unorthodox religious practices. Until his death in 1495, Sem lived in exile, first at the court of the crusading Knights of Rhodes and subsequently with the Pope in Rome. His employment as the leader of a new crusade to retake Istanbul was not successful in Europe. Mehmed II finally achieved his goals of economic expansion, and the value of the coinage was restored. To that purpose, the Ottoman Empire encouraged the thousands of Jews who had been driven from Spain by the Inquisition during the summer of 1492 to immigrate there. They primarily settled in Istanbul, Salonika, modern-day Thessaloniki, Greece, and Edirne, where they joined their fellow believers during the golden age of Ottoman Jewry that lasted well into the 17th century. At this time, Ottoman decline and the growing influence of European diplomats and traders allowed them to advance the interests of the Sultan's Christian subjects at the expense of both Muslims and Jews. Mehmed II started the process of replacing the vassals with direct Ottoman rule throughout the empire, and Bayezid II finished it. Although Bayezid preferred to keep the peace in order to have the time and resources to focus on internal growth, he was compelled to engage in a number of campaigns by the needs of his most adamant Devshirme supporters at the time. By capturing Herzegovina, 1483, he completed the Ottoman Empire in Europe south of the Danube and Sava, leaving only Belgrade ungoverned. After agreeing to a peace treaty with the Ottomans in 1484, the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, reigned 1458–90, was primarily concerned with establishing his power over Bohemia. After his death, conflicts for succession kept that front quiet for the remainder of Bayezid's term. In response, Bayezid unsuccessfully attempted to seize Belgrade using domestic strife in Hungary, and raiding armies dispatched into Transylvania, Croatia, and Carinthia, now Kandon State, Austria, were repulsed. After Sem died in 1495 and a new treaty with Hungary failed to accomplish Bayezid's goals, he turned to Venice, his second main European foe. Venice, which had given the Ottomans control of Albania in 1479, Dalmatia, and the Morea, Peloponnese, had been supporting uprisings against the Sultan. Due to his participation in Europe and his affinity for mysticism, Bayezid was prone to sympathizing with the rebels' religious message, which led to a succession of revolts that he was either unable or unwilling to put down. Finally, a widespread Anatolian insurrection at the beginning of the 16th century compelled Bayezid to launch a significant campaign, 1502–03, that drove the Safavids and many of their Turkmen supporters into Iran. The Safavids concentrated on fostering Shi'ism in that region in order to win the Persian people over to their warrior-dominated monarchy. Suleiman, reigned 1512–20, supported the Janissaries' desire to resume Mehmed II's aggressive program of conquest, in contrast to Bayezid, who had been installed on the throne despite his pacifist disposition and reluctantly engaged in military operations. However, Selim did not want to be dependent on or under the influence of those who had propelled him to power. As a result, he killed all 5 of his sons as well as all 7 of his brother's kids. This left only the most capable son, Suleiman, as the sole heir to the kingdom. In order to recover political authority, Selim first waged a fierce war against the Safavid allies in eastern Anatolia, killing hundreds of tribesmen and missionaries and advocating a rigid defense of Islamic orthodoxy. He launched a significant offensive against the Safavids in the summer of 1514 in an effort to conquer Iran and ultimately put an end to the threat of heterodoxy. The Ottoman triumph did not result in the invasion of Iran or the fall of the Safavid Empire, despite the fact that Tabriz, the capital of Azerbaijan, was occupied. Due to the influence of Safavid propaganda on the already agnostic Janissaries, the Ottoman army grew more and more dissatisfied. Morale was also affected by a relative shortage of supplies and loot in comparison to campaigns in Europe. Selim was forced to leave, and the Safavids easily reclaimed their exiled province. The main outcome of the Cologne battle was to persuade Ismail and his successors to always avoid engaging in open warfare with the Ottomans, a strategy that persisted for a century. The high Islamic civilization of the Abbasids and Seljuks, whose intellectual, artistic, and administrative inheritance had previously been passed to them only indirectly, was now immediately accessible to the Ottomans. Leading Muslim thinkers, craftspeople, administrators, and artists of the era arrived to Istanbul from the Arab world, influencing every aspect of Ottoman life and transforming the empire into a conventional Islamic state to a much greater extent than it had ever been. Finally, the Ottomans replaced the Mamluks in control of the Middle Eastern portion of the old international trade routes between Europe and East. After the collapse of the global Abbasid Empire in the 11th century, a protracted period of political apathy and instability was brought to an end by the Ottoman conquests in the East and the Safavid survival in Iran. Under the direction and protection of strong imperial orders, order and security were finally restored throughout the region, and the stability of Middle Eastern society was recovered. Suleiman I Selim's final years were spent in Istanbul, strengthening the Sultanate's dominance and profiting from the fame and wealth that came from his conquests in the East. Therefore, the foundations laid by Selim were not fully utilized until the lengthy rule of his son and successor, Suleiman I, reigned 1520–66, known as the Lawgiver, Kanuni, among the Ottomans and the Magnificent in Europe. Suleiman I also made significant new conquests in the East and West during his long reign. Suleiman succeeded his father as Sultan in a position unmatched by any Sultan before or after as a result of his father's policies and accomplishments. Hungary and the Mediterranean were the main theatres of Ottoman conquest in Europe under Suleiman. The strong Habsburg dynasty had taken the position of Suleiman's predecessors' weak rivals from southeast Europe, which was strengthened by the Pope's appeals throughout Europe against Islam's threat to Christians. France was Suleiman's principal ally in Europe, and it tried to exploit Ottoman pressure in the south to diminish Habsburg pressure on its eastern borders. The Battle of Mohawks in 1526 saw the defeat of the only true army the nobility of Hungary could assemble, and Louis II's death put an end to the final vestige of Hungarian independence and unification. The anti-Habsburg Hungarian King John, János Zápolya, acknowledged the Sultan's suzerainty in exchange for the right to continue local administration and military defense, which was a defining feature of the second period of Ottoman-Habsburg relations, 1526–1641. Membership in the Ottoman ruling class required three qualities: a public declaration of allegiance to the Sultan and his government, acceptance and practice of Islam and its underlying philosophy and way of life, and knowledge of and adherence to the intricate network of traditions, manners, and language known as the Ottoman way. Their primary responsibilities were to maintain the state's Islamic character and to govern and protect the empire. According to Ottoman ideology, the Sultan's sovereignty consisted primarily of the power to own and utilize all of the empire's financial resources. Therefore, the primary responsibility of the ruling elite was to increase, safeguard, and utilize that wealth for the advantage of the Sultan and his realm. The imperial, or palace, Mulkiye, institution, personally led by the Sultan, provided leadership and direction for the other institutions as well as for the entire Ottoman system. The millet system's goal was to maintain social order in a widely diverse state by keeping the various peoples of the empire apart in order to reduce conflict. The Sultan's Greek and Armenian subjects attacked Jews with blood libel against their people, businesses, and homes due to Christian hate of Muslims, Islamophobia, and Jews, anti-Semitism, causing ongoing tension and rivalry among the many millets. The Sharia, or Muslim religious law, and the Canon, or civil law, served as the legal and customary foundation of Ottoman society's organization and behavior. Like other Muslim communities, Ottoman life was governed by the Sharia. The Sharia, which is thought to be a collection of laws and moral guidelines that were inspired by God, was meant to apply to all facets of Muslim life, but it was most developed in relation to the concerns about individual behavior that affected the early Muslim community and were reflected in the Quran and early Muslim tradition. However, it must be acknowledged that the sultans were never as autocratic as has been claimed due to the limited extent of the Ottoman ruling class and state and the significant areas of authority and function left to the religious communities, guilds, and Ottoman officials who held the mosques. Ottoman reformers only consolidated government and society along Western lines in the 19th century, restricting or eliminating the old autonomies that had significantly contributed to power decentralization in earlier decades. The period from 1481 to 1566 marked a time of remarkable expansion and consolidation of Ottoman power, with the empire reaching its zenith in terms of territorial extent, military prowess, and cultural achievements. However, after Suleiman's death in 1566, the Ottoman Empire began to face challenges, including military defeats and internal strife, leading to a gradual decline in its power over the subsequent centuries.